Yo. Let's do a little grounding before we get rolling. So take a few breaths, I guess, right? And let's feel some good vibes coming in.
This is a medium to help find the others. And for me to hang out with my buddy Paul.
Hell yeah. Must be a bridge, dude.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do this, man.
Hey, welcome to episode 5 of the Inner Work Podcast. So, Paul, I think an interesting topic that we've been discussing throughout our relationship is the concept of ego. For you, Paul, in terms of the ego, how do you define it? Like, how has it evolved? And yeah, in terms of your day-to-day activity, what is your relationship with your ego? I know there's like 3 questions.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a big topic, man. Ego is one of those words that I think many people use, but do we really define it well? I like how you said, how has it evolved? So to me, obviously, I come from a background of yoga philosophy and spiritual study, and it might be slightly different than the psychology world, like of Freud and who's the other famous guy from his time? Freud and
Carl Jung.
There you go, like that guy. They probably define the ego as something a little different, but we can kind of sum it up from the yoga tradition, like it's the collection of me, of what makes me, like but it's the lower me. It's not the soul by any stretch. It's not what I would consider our true self. It's kind of like our collection of thoughts and ideas and emotions that make my personality. So it could be inflated, it could be deflated, it can be a positive connotation, or it can have a negative vibe for some people who have, some self-worth issues or some depression. It's the stuff that makes us us. It's evolved a little bit for me. I love how you asked that question. As I got more into the yoga philosophy, I learned that different traditions and different schools teach different ideas of how to define us. There's a concept called ahamkara in Vedanta, and that's another way to say it's the I maker. It's the part of us that defines ourselves, and that can again have funkiness or smoothness, calmness or roughness, and it develops our self-perception and our projection out into the physical world. Lower self, though. This is, again, not at all what I think we're trying to reach through yoga, though. Through meditation and yoga, we basically bypass all this. We don't deny that it's there, but the soul is something that I believe is greater. Yeah.
So in terms of being aware of that that type of definition, how has it helped or not helped, or how has it helped your relationship with your own self?
Thanks for asking that, because that kind of plays into the question I didn't answer, is what's my relationship to it? Well, it creates a separation, really, and I like that because I don't want to think that my ego is me. I mean, if we even speak of it as something else, right? Like my ego. Most people would think of it as their ego, like as if it's not them, but it's something that they have or that they possess. And I think that's kind of accurate. It's a collection of beliefs and ideas that you can operate through or not operate through. And usually we operate through it. Usually the ego does run everything. We treat the world through our conditioning. And this skin color is a conditioning. This gender is a conditioning. Our soul doesn't have a skin color. Our soul doesn't have a gender. That's a weird concept to many people. So my relationship to it is that it's created a separation, and it helps me meditate, actually, because when I try to go to samadhi, when I try to transcend, when I intend to find connection to my true self, what am I leaving behind? I'm leaving behind my ego, really. I'm leaving behind the lower self, the personality, the name Paul. Yes, it's important. Ego is important. I need the name Paul. I need a social security number. I need a body to go out in the world and do things, but we're more than that.
So how do you notice how do you notice if you're acting out of your ego versus your higher self?
That's a good one, dude. You were going to say something else, though, before I got excited.
Please.
How do we know? Well, a lot of times the ego is laden with emotions, and it's not always like when I say it can be positive emotions. Really, I mean, I always need to be careful when I talk about emotions because it's. I don't want to be accused as demonizing emotions. I don't want to be accused by saying that, accused of saying that emotions need to be shunned. We're humans. We have emotions. So back to the question, how do we know if we're operating through ego? Usually, if it's an emotional reaction, that's usually the ego. And it can be super excitement. So I have to be careful sometimes. I'm naturally like highly energetic. And if I get super excited like I just did when you asked that question, was that ego? Am I trying to be excited? Am I trying to prove to our audience that I'm happy and that I'm full of energy? Am I trying to be that guy that I think Paul's supposed to be? That's ego, dude. That's all ego.
So when, other than outside of yoga, because I know that you study a lot of Eckhart Tolle.
Yes.
Do you feel like he's helped you understand more?
Tremendously. Tremendously. He's helped me evolve. I'd love to get into that. Do you want to share your definition though of ego first?
I think you're already touching upon
Okay.
it. So like one of the people that I follow in terms of spirituality and just the idea of what's going on in the mind, or the blueprint of the mind is Phil Stutz, and he describes it in like the ego wants three things, which is the adoration and the attention of others from the outer world, and then physical gratification, immediate gratification, and an attainment of one's desires, and to be right. So it's the idea of like it's all external. It's this idea of like I want this dependency, but the value of like being, for me, when I'm aware of that, is helps me understand if I'm taking action based off of something of basically the ego, or is it something of an inner calling. Sometimes they can align, like, and then that's
that's true.
And that's where, for example, this aspect of like, it's like potentially getting attention of others by just projecting myself outwardly, but essentially it's still coming from this inner drive towards connecting with you, and then essentially, ideally, connecting with other people, so that we can find other people that are also having these either thoughts or these, and hopefully help others not feel alone.
You're saying the ego helps us do that?
So that's where what I'm saying is that like my ego is also aligned with what my inner self wants at times as well. Like they can sometimes be paired together. But if my ego is only running the show, that's when I think problems arise. Is like, for example,
that's good.
Yeah. So and I think Carl Jung, that's what he kind of mentions, is like the idea of the balance between the ego and like the higher self. It's like this idea of a yin and yang kind of aspect of things. Like not this idea of like one versus the other, but
which one would be the yin and yang? The outward going would probably be the ego, because you said it. Ego has to do with external stuff. That would probably be the yang aspect, the active, and the soul is the calm meditator who's just wise.
Yeah. And another like analogy that like you kind of mentioned, like the self, like how did you phrase it? The self, the I maker,
yeah. the part of us that allows us to have a self-awareness, have a self-consciousness.
And to touch on that real quick is like, this is what I was thinking about, was like, why do these even, if I'm to believe that these three aspects of what the ego wants, like how is that created? And a part of me is this idea of we were all once babies.
Yeah.
And it's the idea of when I'm a baby, I'm like, my relationship to the world is based off of getting nurtured, getting what I want. And
it's very selfish.
Yeah.
But that's how it's supposed to be at that point in your life.
It's an aspect of development. And then I think that's where I used to have this relationship with the idea of ego. Is like, oh, I shouldn't have it. It's not anything of any value. But now it's become this point of just being aware it's another passenger in this vessel.
That's very interesting. It's probably a healthy way to view it.
But like you were saying, how does Eckhart Tolle describe it?
He describes it almost the same way that I did. He's helped me define it, really. It's when I say lower, I just mean physical nature. Our brain, our experiences, our abilities to move in the world and to do things in the physical world. All the parts of us that are not our higher self, that's not our spiritual soul. It's that. And it's the part of us that has the ability to get hurt and to have suffering. The soul doesn't have that ability. It exists in a world where those vibrations don't even exist. That's why it's necessary. The ego is necessary until a point in our evolution when we've learned all of the lessons that getting hurt can provide us. If there's no more reason to get hurt, the ego is no longer necessary for us. But that, in my opinion, will take many lifetimes. Many, like hundreds of lifetimes. Yeah, that's how Eckhart Tolle. And he, with that definition, he suggests that we recognize it when it's operating, like you said. How do you know? When you recognize when the ego is operating, when a reaction happens that you didn't really think about first, that you just spouted off. Sometimes we call it a knee-jerk reaction, like when you guys don't use those things on the knees anymore, do you? Where you
reflex hammers, yeah.
Doctors
still use it, yeah.
Yeah.
Still a useful tool.
We kind of funnily use that term, a knee-jerk reaction, when we react to things in life. If that occurs often, that's probably your ego. Because did you really plan on that reaction? If you got mad or you yelled at someone or lost your temper, that's usually a knee-jerk type of reaction where the ego just quickly made connections to other times when you were hurt or when you were yelled at or when someone cut you off in traffic and then you got mad. But did you take a couple breaths and really evaluate? And no, you didn't. That's usually ego.
Yeah, and as we're talking about it, I think it at one point in time has like an evolutionary purpose.
Yes. Where
it's the idea of immediately it is important to knee-jerk react if there's danger or if there's a fire or if there's some sort of threat.
You're right about that, aren't you? Yeah, I guess that would be the case. Like animals, they run at the slightest danger.
And it's this idea of like, oh, I'm going to immediately satisfy my urge because I don't know when I'm going to get food again. But I think as we've evolved, especially as humans in this modern society, a lot of those aspects aren't really as necessary.
Bingo. I love that you said that. And I think we can apply that to our lives individually. The emotional reactions and the emotions that we have, I think for many people, they're not as necessary anymore. They're not. It's weird to think of that though, because the pushback that I normally get, or the response rather, just the response is, but do you want me to be monotone? You want me to be like just, no. You can have awe and wonder and positivity and love and compassion. Those are not knee-jerk experiences, but they're calm, right? And they're serene. And sattvic is the word we use a lot for something that's very calm. That's from Ayurveda, very neutral. You can have those things without emotional roller coastering. I'm not sure how emotional roller coastering can really be helpful. I mean, if there's a fire, you got to get, oh my God, fight or flight, go. That's kind of a roller coaster. And then you're huffing and puffing, so that's the down. The up was when you had the adrenaline, and then the down is when you're catching your breath and you're down the street and you're safe, there's no more fire. I guess that's when it's necessary.
And as we're talking about it, I think about it more as like a tool that's being sharpened as we all... it becomes a tool through life. There's this opportunity to sharpen it, meaning that it can be this thing that never evolves for one individual, where I just continuously react to everything that's coming in my way,
right?
And continuously let the ego run the show of just immediate gratification, seeking gratification, and it becomes this never-ending. I mean, it's the hedonic treadmill of I'm never, ever satisfied.
And it keeps getting steeper and steeper. That's interesting, always wanting more.
And then, but what you're mentioning is that over time, though, I can become aware of that there is this roller coaster, but find this kind of middle ground. Similar to bringing it to yoga, where I feel yoga has helped me do is realize how to meet my ego and realize how to pace myself and discern. Like, okay, is this my ego right now that's deciding to push through, or is this really what I'm potentially called to do in this moment from my higher self?
I think that was your idea for this this discussion in the first place. It was after a yoga class, I think, with David one Monday evening. I think you said something similar to that, and then I'm like, oh, can we bring the ego as a main point into that? And you're like, yeah, but that's a great example of when you can evaluate, is this my ego operating, or am I being fooled by my ego, basically? The ego sometimes filters us so much that we can't really see the truth of what's going on. We think it's, oh, I'm so tired, I can't do this. Or is it just, let me take a breath here. Let me do what our yoga teachers say and just relax a little bit of effort. Oh, I'm okay, actually. Wow, maybe I don't have to stop. I can do this. That's great, man. That's a wonderful opportunity to see, is it my ego or not? In a yoga class, it could be extremely challenging, especially if it's hot and you've got, sweat dripping from places you didn't know you could even sweat from. And the ego can play games with you in those moments, right?
Yes. And to kind of like clearly more outline kind of the conversations that are in my mind at times, which is, am I pushing myself to prove something, or or in the opposite side of things, am I taking a pause because I just want to stay in comfort?
There are so many layers, right? And there's never a right or wrong answer to anyone but you. You're the only one that can analyze that and know if you're pushing to prove something or not. The yoga room is such a great training ground. It really is. And a lot of times in group classes, heck yeah, we try to prove something, either to the teacher because they're our friend or we want to impress them, or to someone else in the room. We all do that. You do that, don't they?
Yeah.
Doesn't that person do it right there? No, I do. No, come on.
Pointing
the
3 fingers back at myself.
Of course. Like, I know it's true. Yes. Proving something. What else did you say? Or maybe it goes both ways. Like, am I resting because I truly need it, or because I just don't want to put the effort in right now, even though I committed to, exercising? It could go both ways.
Yeah. It's literally a conversation I have with me every time I wake up to go to yoga. Like I can come up with every reason not to show up.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, my ankle's kind of bothering. I'm running kind of late. But every time I show up, and this is where it's practice within the practice, right? Where it's this being able to discern that voice and be aware that there is sometimes multiple narratives going on that.
Yep.
And you touched upon this, circling back to the beginning, where it's like, this is just a part of me. Maybe it isn't completely me.
And when you see the world through the ego only, when the ego is driving the ship, you think that's all there is. You don't even recognize or remember that you have a soul, or that you are the soul. That's the one thing that's hardest in yoga philosophy, is to flip-flop our understanding about our relationship to our soul, let alone the ego. Like, doesn't it seem like we have a soul? I wish we didn't think that. I wish we thought we have a body. We have a body and a personality and an ego. Well, what do you mean you have? Well, I'm the soul, and I have a body. He's a male. He's a doctor. He has glasses on. But that's just something I have. Why is it not that? Because it's normally, I have a soul. Well, what are you? Well, I'm just a body that's going to die in 80 years. No. Yeah. You're not that. The ego and your body is temporary. Your soul has a body.
As you're saying this, I think it's, for me, my relationship with that breakdown is, it's because the soul is has the quietest voice, but it actually potentially has the wisest one.
It's so good. Yes, until we build that channel and the connection, which in theosophy we call it the antakarana. I've mentioned it a few times, but it's the channel from our lower self to our higher self. Like, some traditions call it the silver thread or the silver cord, or whatever the connection is you have to your soul and your soul has to your lower self. If that connection is big, meaning you practice meditation every day, getting your consciousness out of your crazy dramas and emotions and things that keep us stuck in the physical world, and be the soul, like experience samadhi, which isn't crazy. Like, you can experience samadhi in 2 seconds if some of us can. So then we have more of a relationship with it, and it's not as quiet. It really isn't. The intuition will be louder. Your inner wisdom will come through more. But that's a tall order for most of us. Most humans, yes, the soul is quiet.
Yeah, it's like a mixer where you kind of have to like turn down the volume on some of one mic and the other mic. But one thing that I kind of want to put out there too is, and I think we've touched on this before, is that sometimes even the definition of soul can be a triggering word for people.
Oh, that's true.
Where for me, especially to the people that are very, objective or science objective kind of material, kind of very physical.
Yeah, materialistic for sure.
It's the idea of like beyond my physical body, beyond my logical mind, there's something there that I cannot see.
Right.
And that is one way that's helped me communicate to other people what the soul might be. Similar to again, we've talked about this before in previous podcasts, which is the aspect of love. Like can't really see it, can't really measure it, but I think we can say it exists. But my point in saying of bringing that up is the idea of the soul is just a word that we're using to communicate in different ways. This aspect that might be filled with a lot, in my experience, filled with more wisdom than what my materialistic mind tends to gravitate towards.
Good. Yeah, we don't need to call it even a soul, but you're right. It's language. It's it refers to some part of us that's not in the physical world. Yeah, words mess things up, like the word God, the word love, the word God, the word soul. Yeah. Is there something that I'm calling a soul for you, though? Do you feel
I think
that?
like the higher self, like, and the other thing actually is something that I've started to explore more, and I think it's an aspect of the soul, which is the shadow, which is more of a Carl Jung kind of derived term, which is the aspect of myself that it's a living being in itself, and something that like exists and is born every time I push down shame. So it's this idea of
only shame or all
shame,
negative?
guilt, like a lot of and I think you've talked about this with
the pain body.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe it's.
So there's all these different languages. It's similar, like there's hundreds of ways to say hello.
Yes, exactly. You're right. Language, yeah.
But it's still the same theme of the idea of there's something more. Okay, this is what I want to get at. The value of me even being aware that this exists is it helps me discern between the narratives in my mind. And by being able to discern which narratives are in my mind, it helps me make decisions that are ideally made with more clarity, made with more intention.
Yeah.
And in doing so, facilitate more peace, which essentially is what a lot of these practices are about.
Exactly.
Finding peace, living with suffering.
And then it becomes not suffering anymore, I feel like. If you live,
Yes. But in your experience, Paul, like when you teach, like I'd imagine there are that becomes a whole other practice of meeting your ego. Or how would you describe it?
When I teach?
Yeah.
Yes. I kind of wish teaching yoga and taking a yoga class were more similar, but they're so not. There are similar aspects. They're practices, but completely different kinds of practices. Yes, of course. And I need to check my ego a lot. How strict am I being in class? How playful am I being? And why? Why am I being strict and why am I being playful? Am I trying to be the teacher who knows all the words and I'm saying it and I know the alignment and I want to be strict because I want to show off my knowledge? Is it that? And then when I'm playful, is it because, again, like I said earlier, do I want to be that guy that, oh, Paul's the fun, happy guy? Maybe I want to be that, but I have to check. It's a constant ego check. Or am I just letting flow occur? And I believe I do that most of the time. I do. Do I get self-conscious? Yes, often. Yeah, like this morning in breathwork class, it was only half full, and usually the class is maxed out on Saturday mornings at Kintsugi. I'm like, and then I started thinking, last week I taught something different where we were laying down for a lot longer, and I'm like, oh, maybe they didn't like that we were laying down for so long, and they didn't come back this week. Like, I do that all the time, and then I'm like, Paul, stop it. It's just a random Saturday, and only 14 people came versus 20. So yes, that's ego. That's my ego wondering, am I good enough? I do it all the time. Yes.
And then how do you feel this relationship of how that dialogue is now compared to how it was when you first started teaching?
It was way worse. I keep telling Natalia this. She's been teaching now for a year. Her teacher training was last July. And she gets nervous, and I told her, and then this is, hey, I was nervous teaching vinyasa for about 7 years. I started teaching in 2013, and then I only got really comfortable teaching vinyasa classes after I started teaching at Kintsugi. I had 2 morning classes, a Monday and a Wednesday. I got a lot more experience teaching vinyasa because I was teaching set series like a true signature type, which is no creativity. It's just the same thing. And I keep telling her, Natalia, I was nervous, and I had to write down my sequence for like 6 years before I got comfortable. So don't worry about being nervous. Yeah, I got nervous a lot, and I still do if it's like if I'm teaching at the Mandalay Bay Beach for a convention of 300 people. I love it. And I think a little bit of nervousness is important because it kind of keeps you focused, keeps you on your game. It sucks you into the present moment.
And that's actually where I would imagine the value of the ego does serve it. It can become this supporter in those moments where you have to rise to an occasion.
Yes, exactly. I always quote Eckhart Tolle because I think he's such a great teacher. His 2 books, A New Earth, which I think is the pinnacle, and then his other book, The Power of Now, which is amazing as well. I don't remember which book it's in, but he tells a story called The Monk with Sweaty Palms. And it was a wise monk, a teacher who was giving presentations, and I'm going to butcher the story, but he was going to be giving a big talk to a big group of people, and before he gave it, he actually canceled. He said he would not be giving the presentation at all, and they were like, "Why? Everyone's gathered." And he said something along the lines of, "I feel that I'm nervous, and my palms are sweating, and I'm not in the place of Zen. So how can I speak on Zen Buddhism if I'm not in Zen?" And he's acknowledging something's going on. That was just enough of his ego to bubble up. He's worried, oh my gosh, am I going to say something that they don't like? And he's getting nervous. And he refused to do it because he wasn't in complete integrity. But that's not realistic for most of us. That's a Zen monk. For us, yes, we can take that little bit of nervousness and channel it and go out. That's the difference between an ascetic and what I call a spiritual warrior. An ascetic or a renunciate, someone who goes away into a monastery or into the jungle, into an ashram, and goes away from the physical world. It's a different practice to do that. We are not that at all, which both are good. We're out in the world. We need to show up and do stuff. And even if we're not perfect, we need to still do stuff. Like right now, we're probably messing some words up, and we're doing stuff, though.
Yes. This is why this itself is a practice.
Yes, it is.
And even as I was driving here, I was like, even earlier today, there's always an aspect of me, I was like, oh, what if Paul just cancels? I would be okay. But
I think that too sometimes.
But that's because there's a part of me that is afraid of failing.
Of course.
Afraid of like just saying the wrong thing, afraid of putting myself out there and just falling on my face. But every time we do this, I'm grateful we do it. And I think that's like overcoming that inner critic are these small victories that all add up. And that's, again, circling back to,
yes.
Do you identify with these feelings?
Yes, dude. Everything you're saying, I feel the same. It's funny, right? I say to myself sometimes, if Jason cancels, I'll be okay. I'll be okay with it. Yes, dude, I feel the same. And I'm afraid of, but we have to get up. It's willpower. It's dedication. It's putting one foot in front of the other, right? Or else we never do anything.
Yeah, and I think that it's a phrase that I've heard, which is like everything is small in the eyes of the universe. So you just keep taking these small steps, and they're all. It's a world of small things, but it's this idea of, again, the value of me kind of applying that kind of point of view is that I don't have to put all this pressure on everything being either the biggest victory or the biggest fail. It's just these multiple small steps, which essentially is what, going back to yoga, is that bigger practice. Like every every breath that I take, every transition, it matters in its own way.
I agree so much. Man, that's such a big concept too. Every detail matters. Some people think they don't, like the details don't matter, but I think they actually do because they add up. And our soul, if we believe in this thing, that our soul is eternal, it absorbs it all. And you're training your soul, really. You're training your soul for your next life. Like, some of us have natural proclivities and we're good at certain things, we're not good at others naturally, like child prodigies and all that. Child prodigies can be explained by the soul being eternal, and that soul has done that thing that prodigy is good at for many lifetimes, and they're freaking the best on earth now. Everything matters. Every step of our path matters, and if we're supposed to fail a couple times. We're supposed to. How can you possibly learn the lessons without failing a couple times? You can learn a lot from watching others, and we should, but we have to experience some failure too. We have to experience some heartache, because if you read about heartache a lot, you might know every clinical psychologist's evaluation of every heartache case in history. You might memorize every single one, but if you never feel it, did you really learn it by reading?
Yeah. So, touching on the idea of failure and going back to this concept of the hedonic treadmill, it's this idea of like constantly getting what I want and things are just going smoothly all the time and there is no resistance. It's this idea of I'll constantly, it parallels the same thing that happens if I'm always getting what I want. My dopamine will deplete. And the same thing with this hedonic treadmill is that like even though I got this amount of money, I'll still want more, I'll still want more, I'll still want more, and I'll keep on going.
That's a condition of the ego. That's a natural condition. Just like our soul has traits, that's an egoic trait. It's never satisfied. That's why one of the yamas and niyamas taught by Patanjali is we need to learn to have satisfaction and contentment. It doesn't mean that you don't also have strive and willpower. It means that you can be okay with the current state, not always need more, because that treadmill will never stop. You can test it if you want to, but the ego will never be satisfied.
Can you touch upon that yama again?
Yes, of course. It's called Santosha. Santosha is one of like the 10, you can call them the 10 commandments in yoga philosophy. It's in the 8-limbed path. Santosha refers to the concept that we, okay. We've all heard me say vairagya before. It's not Viagra, it's vairagya. And that means non-attachment, which means let things go when it's time to let them go. Okay, Santosha is similar. It's a little bit easier to practice contentment. It's a little bit easier. But the ego doesn't like that because the ego gets bored. The ego wants to be better than others and better than itself was. The ego gets complacent. So Santosha means that look around, get calm. Do we have what we need? Are we good? Like, let's be honest about that. Or do we need something? Do we need to buy the next iPhone when it comes out? Do we need that? Why? Maybe we do. Maybe we need it for work. Maybe the camera is going to be better for podcasts. Maybe we do need it for something. But do we? And the advertising industry feeds on lack of Santosha. The whole world's advertising industry, the whole global industry of advertising. You need this. Get this so you can look cool. Get this so you can be healthier. You can lose weight. Or Santosha means chill. Yes, you might need to buy some things in your life. You clearly do sometimes. But know when enough's enough. Know when $10 million in your bank account is enough. I mean, most of us don't have $10 million, but some people do and they want more. Some rich people that have $1 billion net worth are not satisfied and they want $2 billion net worth or $10 billion. It never ends.
In the yoga kind of scriptures, does it talk about how to reach Santosha or how to practice it?
Yes. I wish I wish it said something more exciting, but it's the same thing that we always are taught in yoga. It's to practice meditation and being in the present moment. You said it yourself. When you meditate, I forget how you phrased it, but it brings peace. Like these practices bring peace, you were saying. You said that a few minutes ago. That's it. Can you really have peace? That's Santosha. Santosha shows up when you have peace.
It's interesting how I sometimes want a more.
I know.
And I think that's my ego,
I
where
know.
it's like there has to
I
be
know.
something big. It has to
I know.
a magic. But I think that it's as simple as just sitting and becoming more familiar with my thoughts. I mean, not simple, but it's as direct and forward as just
I know.
sitting with myself.
The Yoga Sutras is such a fascinating text, and I love studying it. And Patanjali gives these 8 limbs, like these 8 steps: yama, niyama, then your asana, pranayama, pratyahara, controlling your senses, and then the 3 meditation: learn to focus, dharana, extended focus, dhyana, and then actual meditation, samadhi. This is famous. How do you do all that, though? I love the text of the sutras because he gives us all this great information, and then he starts to say, okay, here's how you do it. And the first thing he says is abhyasa vairagya tan nirodha. He says, do your practice and practice non-attachment. That's the first clue he gives us as to how to get there. Do your practice and be non-attached. So what's your practice? Well, there are 100,000 different practices to do. You do a bunch of practices. David Vandermeer does a bunch of practices. I do different things. They're all great. Do your practice and don't be attached and keep doing your practice. That's the first thing Patanjali says. Then, of course, he goes into more detail and learn to be stable in your asana, learn to breathe with a 1-to-1 ratio. When your mind wanders, bring it back to something positive. If you have negative thoughts, counteract them with the opposite. There are a bunch of other clues, but practice and don't be attached.
So, in your practice of non-attachment, what does that look like in your mind or in your meditation?
It means 2 basic things, with each thing having a lot of implications. So the first thing is not being attached to the results of the practice. So if we're trying to raise Kundalini and get psychic and get super powerful, we don't want to think that holding our breath for 3 minutes is going to do that, or doing Kapalabhati for 16 minutes is going to do that. So don't be attached to the results. So the results will come. The second thing is even bigger, I think. It's practicing non-attachment to everything in your life, physical and intangible. So what does that look like for me? Well, it almost sounds morbid in a sense, and I don't do this every time I meditate, but I do Vairagya practices sometimes. I will imagine losing stuff and seeing how I would feel. And the goal is to not be moved. Like, yes, you can take action. Like if your house is robbed and you get a bunch of stuff stolen, call the police, of course, do a report, call your insurance, but do it mindfully and don't have this emotional reaction to it that'll make your heart rate go up. What if you're elderly and if you have a heart attack, you might die? Like, stay calm, if it's time for you to die, of course. It sounds terrible, but yes, sometimes I'll actually think to myself, what if I lost a leg and I cannot do the same kind of yoga that I love doing? My ego's like, fuck, that would suck. I wouldn't be able to do all the stuff that I do in class. I wouldn't be able to. Is it showing off? I don't know. I think I'm pretty good but I practice thinking about that sometimes. What if I lost my relationship? What if, my mother is going to pass away at some point. My father is going to pass away. Yes, I think about that stuff. And I prepare for it because it's going to frickin' happen. Loss happens. If you don't know the concept of non-attachment, you might become incapacitated when a big loss occurs. Unless you prepare for it a little bit.
So when you're exploring those thoughts that are can be heavy.
Hugely heavy.
How do you stay continuing to navigate those thoughts in your mind? Like, meaning for me, I can sometimes dissociate. I can sometimes distract when those things happen. How do you...
When they happen, meaning like when the thoughts happen?
During your practice.
Well, I'm intentionally going there on purpose. Like...
So then where do you, like, for example, when your mind goes, what if I won't be able to practice yoga?
Oh, right.
Like because what I'm looking at this as is similar to chess, where you're anticipating some potential moves.
Oh, okay. So
but then you're regulate. It sounds like you're preparing your body and your nervous
So what's the
system.
action plan?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Well, every imagined or perceived circumstance would obviously have a very different set of action steps. One could be getting depressed and going downhill, taking pills or something. That could be, it's not going to solve it, but that's what some people do if they lose a limb, right? You get depressed. You go into your home and you become a recluse. But no, my imagination doesn't go there. So let's take the example that you said. If I lose a limb, yeah, it's actually a good practice to do because you don't know what's going to happen. Let's play it out. Like I would wake up in the hospital. I would freak out at first. I would look down. I'd probably have that phantom leg syndrome. It would probably be physically painful. I would immediately go to my breath. I would have to. That's the only tool that I know in moments of physical pain. Breath. Pratyahara. Remember that tell myself I'm a soul. It's probably not going to work in that moment. I'm a soul and I have a physical body and I can turn off my senses by breathing. You know, if I can't handle it, maybe I'll scream. I don't know but then, you know, maybe a day or two will go by. I'll have to get up and somehow learn how to walk on crutches. I'll have to learn how to do some chair yoga. I will be embarrassed and I will smile and laugh. And, you know, I could play out my life like that and maybe it'll turn out like Nick Vujicic. Vujicic. Do you know who that guy is? No? I'm saying his name wrong, but his first name is Nick for sure. He is a master yogi. And I encountered this guy when I referenced real estate a lot because my formative adult life was in real estate. We used to have, Keller Williams has national conventions every year. And there's usually several different keynote speakers. And Nick V spoke to us one year. And the dude is basically a torso with a head. And he's the most motivational guy that I've ever seen. And he made me cry. And he walks around the stage on two little stumps of legs. Doesn't have any. He has, let's see, I think one of his legs has some kind of, he calls it a chicken wing. It's something like this on his leg that he can do, like, poke things with. He's amazing. He doesn't have any arms or legs.
Yeah, so your ability though to think about the future but not get stuck in worry is an interesting practice.
Not get stuck. Well, if I worry about that, it's completely it's imaginative, and I think I could see that is there any logic in worrying? Not really about that. About like the chances of me losing a limb are small. So why stress out about that?
But even that's where the reason I'm bringing this up, Paul, is because I meet a lot of people in my day job that get in a what if, stuck in what if, like
yep.
In terms of worst case scenarios.
I appreciate you bringing that up. It's very common. I know a lot of people like that.
I can do that too at times.
Yes.
I think that though, what's helped me break out of that is kind of what we've talked about throughout this conversation, which is continuously taking small steps and being aware of that inner narrative and breaking the loop. And the more times I break the loop, it creates this, from a neurology standpoint, it's neuroplasticity. It's just creating a new pathway over and over. The phrase that I bring up to patients is, it's like creating another option on the menu. Where it's like,
so
I didn't even know I could order that.
Good. Oh, Jason, that's so good. That is, I love that.
I mean, there's a modification, right? That's essentially what you laid out in that whole narrative, is that you would modify, which is essentially what yoga is on an every moment-to-moment practice.
It is. Let's say one of your patients is just worrying about something that is very unlikely to happen. I mean, do they usually relate it to something that like is going on in their body, like, or is it something completely imagined that really doesn't have any connection to now?
I mean, it depends. I think both scenarios happen where it's this idea of, and this is a common pattern. Like for example, chest pain for a younger individual, they come in, but it's the aspect of they saw it happen to their parents.
Okay.
So it's implanted in their mind that it's very fresh of like,
Okay.
oh, this can be real.
Yes.
And sometimes it is, but most of the times it isn't for people, especially that are less than the age of 30. Don't get me wrong. There are people that are these cases that do happen, but a lot of the
chest
times,
pain. What might cause what they're feeling? And they're feeling something clearly.
Oh yeah. It's real.
What might cause it if it has nothing? If it never develops into heart attack or anything, what might cause that for people?
So I hesitate just to label it just as anxiety, but it's this idea of it's bigger than anxiety. It's the aspect of what anxiety leads to in terms of changes in the body. Where it changes with how people breathe. Okay. It changes how people tense.
So the body reacts.
And even internally, like where from a fight or flight standpoint. And I something that I've started to notice more when I'm practicing of like if I'm in a stressful state, I'm like, why do I feel this heaviness around my chest? Like it's something that I've been talking about with David, which is like loneliness. It's the idea of like, oh, is this loneliness an experience that I'm happening right now, or is this because I'm thinking about a memory? Or it's an aspect of a relived experience from the past.
I see. So the muscles are physically contracting.
So I think there's something more that I can't really be able to. I can't break down and I have yet to hear anyone really break it down. Other than what ends up happening is we do all the testing. All of it's negative, and then we just say it's anxiety or visceral somatic. So it's the idea of
visceral somatic.
Yeah, visceral meaning like internal organs that it's leading to that bodily sensation. So, and I think that going back to how did we get here?
Well, first everything matters, and then but then we took it to the Santosha, which is trying to be content with the current state.
Yeah,
and then we were talking about letting go, practicing vairagya, and being cool with the present moment, not knowing what's going to happen in the future, but we can prepare for it. So we are going through scenarios. We can prepare for it.
Yes, and circling back to this idea of worry and the effect that this has on the body, it's the idea that what you described there in Santosha of like going and even imagining all these worst case scenarios, it eases for me it eases. It's just similar to hot yoga where there's like that peak pose where the first time I ever practiced yoga, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna die.
Yeah,
this is
literally.
I might
my heart's
pass
gonna
out.
stop. Yeah.
But the more I explore that area, the more that my body's like, we've been here before. This is okay. We'll get through this. So that's where the same thing that happens if, essentially, that's the value of therapy for many people, or is my hope and hopeful intention for people, is that it creates a place for people to process their emotions in a safe space in worst case scenarios. So that's essentially how anyone gets over a phobia, right? It's this idea of it's always either I either never. The example I give to people is like either if you're afraid of clowns, either you choose to walk the opposite way of a clown, or you try to understand why you're afraid of the clown and then try to break down and unpack in a safe space with someone that can help you, guide you. Essentially, what even hot yoga is like, where if I just walked in there and I was just doing the poses and no one's there, like I don't know that Paul's there to like watch me if he sees me passing out. Like, it just gives me some level, or just knowing that you're there. And you even have said this before, where you're like, I haven't seen anyone pass out yet, and I've been teaching for X number of years. It's a point of reassurance to know that like these experiences can be normal and I'm safe.
These are very, very valuable tools that you're giving, very practical and nothing advanced. These aren't like super crazy, like rocket scientific type of things. Evaluating, but you can't do that if you don't open your eyes and kind of look around and take a couple breaths and be able to evaluate. If you just freak out and the freak out takes over, that's ego, and you're done at that point. You are out of control. When you went to hot yoga and you said, "Oh, am I going to die?" I had a similar experience, and I think I actually have mentioned that in one of our podcasts. The very first time I took a Bikram class, I remember it vividly. It was July of 2011 at Bikram West Side on Hualapai and Twain. I remember I thought I was crazy by going to a hot workout class in the heat. And when I walked in the room, it was like I felt like it was suffocating. And then I was nervous and I laid my mat down and there were 35, 40 people. And then when the teacher came in, the door closed and I had that like tunnel. You know the effect in a movie, like when you get super focused and then everything, like it's like you zoom in kind of like a tunnel. When the door closed, time was going slower and I went to the door and I was freaking out. Like, oh my God, this is, and I was like thinking, do I get my stuff up and run out? Do I do that? But then I said, no, look at all these other people. They're chilling. There's 35 other people that are fine. So shut up, Paul. Chill out. You're fine. Stop freaking out. Just breathe. Yes, there was a reason that I was concerned. I grew up with asthma. My physical bronchial tubes swell up from time to time. They physically constrict the lungs. There is something going on that is cause for concern. But in this moment, right now, okay, I'm alive. I took a breath. Some of these tools have to be so basic. So basic.
Yeah. And even there, I think you touch upon something that the visceral somatic is if someone grows up with asthma,
mm-hmm.
it's and what I've seen is that it gets easy. I mean, that's a pattern of that can, even if it's not being triggered, of like remembering that feeling of what it's like to feel like an asthma attack.
Yep.
And it's the idea of like, is this asthma attack happening in here or is this happening in here or both?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but asthma is one of those conditions that can be triggered by physiological reactions like pollens and dust, but also it can be triggered by anxiety, can't it? Can't it be triggered?
I mean, to a degree, it can be worsened by it.
Worse, but the onset can't be sparked by like a hypertensive.
I feel like I've seen it. I've seen people get, in terms of no differently than I've seen people have panic attacks
Right.
come in for chest pain.
Right. That's really interesting because if we can make ourselves sick, why can't we make ourselves healthy too?
Yes.
Yeah, man. And that's what, for those of you who don't know, this is his MO as a doctor. He prescribes yoga and for his patients. It's amazing.
But I think that this is important in terms of what you're mentioning is basically this foundation of you were figuring this out intuitively. Like by you going into yoga and you having these discussions and you being able to similarly, I'd imagine like the first yogis that are just like, this is, why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm.
But there's something and very practical about just continuing to endure. And my point in bringing this up is the idea of, even though for the average person that sees you now, they're like, oh, this is just how Paul's always been, like where it's just easy for him. But I think that and I love that you're so able to touch upon your origin story of like this humbling beginning of like not feeling like,
Oh, for sure.
like this is something you would pursue your whole life.
Right. You call it imposter syndrome, call it whatever. Yeah, it took me a long time to get comfortable and confident. I know that I have I've always had a natural ability to stay relatively calm, and I never really had a big temper. And I believe that I've worked on these kinds of things in other lives. I believe I have, if that's a real thing, if that exists. But I've also worked on it in this life. And many times, like I was mentioning earlier, we have certain proclivities. If we're naturally good at something, we've probably done it before, either unintentionally or intentionally. If we're really good at something, I'm sure we've done it intentionally before, and here we are going again, and we can make it go farther every time. Our soul has absorbed all of the experiences and lessons every lifetime. And I believe that I've worked on some of these things, but I'm far from perfect. I get super annoyed at things. I get super egoic at things. Look, this might be a good time to circle back to the ego in the yoga room as a student. And we were talking about that earlier. Can we talk a little bit about that some more?
Please.
I think it's very practical. How are we doing on time? I think we're okay. When we were, unless you had another thought that you wanted to bring up. Okay. When we're in the class as a student and we're deciding if we're going to take that extra bind or go to bird of paradise or not. You know, a lot of teachers will say, okay, extended side angle, maybe take a half bind, full bind, bird of paradise, back handspring flip, levitation for an hour on your fingertip. So how much of that do we do, if any? You mentioned a couple times that you will back off, and then is it ego? Then you might push yourself. Is that ego? So what I wanted to say, though, before you can really decide what you want to do mindfully, I want to say that we have to figure out what we're doing there. Like what are we doing there? What is it for? What are we there for? You can ask yourself what the goal of yoga is. What am I trying to get out of it? And then be honest with yourself, because I know that many people are there for different reasons. I know that. I believe that. So what is our actual goal for being in a yoga class? Is it to connect with someone that you want to see there? That's what it is for a lot. It's social. It's social time for a lot of people. Is it to build muscles? So you got to ask yourself that, I think. We have to ask ourselves that before we can really mindfully say, what's appropriate? Should I be pushed? Should I go to bird of paradise, or should I stay in side angle?
What does that look like for you on at this current stage or season of your practice?
I pull back physically a lot now. And I practice what I think is actually harder sometimes. A couple reasons why I pulled back recently. I don't do as well in the heat as I used to. And that might be a symptom of my lifestyle choices these days. You probably know, I may have told you that I haven't been getting the best sleep over the past year, really. I used to be very good about going to bed at 10 or 10:30, waking up early after 7 or 7.5, maybe 8 hours. I haven't done that in a long time, and so I'm sure my lack of tolerance for the heat is partially because of that. It might be because of my food choices, or it doesn't have anything to do with the sleep, the food, and it's just my natural body changing. I'm 43. I've done a lot of hot yoga, so I'm not as tolerant. So part of my reason for pulling back is that. Part of my reason is that I want to work on the deeper aspects of yoga, which is, can I be even calmer and more still and more stable? And that is, I believe, one of the major purposes of physical yoga. How stable are we? In these classes that a lot of us love going to, they're fun and they're exciting and they're fast and we never stay still. And it almost feels like an acrobatics training, because every time there's a sun salutation, there's a handstand and a chin stand. And I want to work on being stable. I want to work on being calm in the pose. And how much am I fidgeting? How much am I moving? Or can I be still? So there's also another reason why I pull back. I want others to see me pull back. And I don't think it's ego, because I teach a lot and I want students to see that a prominent teacher who practices a lot doesn't take the bird of paradise option every time. I almost never take it anymore. Why? My question is, why do I need to take bird of paradise? It's a hamstring stretch, which I get in a lot of other things. It's a balance, which I'm really good at balancing. It's a bind. I'm pretty good at binding. I don't need that pose in that moment where it's hard as hell in the heat. And now if it was unheated, and I want more unheated classes and I want to teach more. And I love that David has Monday and Wednesday. I wish I had classes like that. Like, those are the classes I want to teach, unheated vinyasa, but they don't exist. They're all heated. Yeah.
So when with that being the current relationship with your practice now, do you feel like it's as satisfying, or how would you describe it? Is it frustrating, or is it just is?
The physical practice?
Yeah.
It's incredibly satisfying. I love my physical practice. Love it. I've evolved so much. Even though I don't do as many crazy arm balances. I mean, I still can. I can still hold a handstand in the middle of the room without a wall. I can hold it and breathe. No, it's incredibly satisfying, but not the hot classes though. But not, I don't, no, it's a little, I'm a little sad about that because they're fun and I want to hang out with fun people and I enjoy group energy. So I seek out the classes that are less hot. Yeah, no, I love my practice. I enjoy yoga very much, physical yoga, very, very much.
Yeah, I think this is meaningful to hear how your relationship with the physical practice is continuing to evolve. I think that I identify with that feeling too, even though I'm not a teacher, but it's this idea of noticing where my mind goes when things are physically challenging. Like, is it something that am I doing this to prove something, or more specifically, am I going to the past or future? Like a lot of the times, like my mind will get distracted in thinking that, I want this to be over with already.
Interesting.
Or like as soon as it begins, like I'll already kind of get into a state of catastrophe of like, I don't know how I'm going to survive this class, or should I just take Shavasana right now?
Does that happen often?
Yeah. I think it's because I practice pretty much every day now.
Yeah, amazing.
And it's more so a means of me maintaining my sanity. It's like medicine.
I love it.
But that's where I look at it now, where it's like I don't need to push myself physically hard every day because I'm getting these micro doses every day.
Nice. Does that, you have those feelings in yin class, or is it mainly?
It's mostly.
It's mainly just the hard ones.
Mostly the hard ones, but even in yin. Hey, what's up? Even in yin, we got our third guest today.
Yeah. Hey, what's up?
What do you think about ego? So she's
like, I just do a full bind and stay there and fall asleep.
So I think that even in yin though, there are times where I'm just like, maybe I'll just sleep here right now in this moment. But a part of me still wants to maintain the group energy in terms of I feel there's a flow happening where I'm like, we'll all stick together.
100%. I love that about group classes. There is a flow for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I hope that if people listen to this, it just becomes this another option in the menu of taking an inventory on where one's mind goes during the practice. Yes,
it's so important to evaluate and analyze. Let's. I mean, I would love to chat a little bit more. We touched on this concept of worry. Do you think we should explore it a little bit more, or is
I'm open?
Okay, but if you want to end, we can.
No, I was just like feeling you out, man.
No,
I'm always down.
We touched on that, and that's gigantic for so many people. Imagining future events. There are lots of tools for that, and I want to say that is a detriment. I mean, I shouldn't be harsh, but worrying about the future events, it's like sabotaging yourself, because what if they never happen? And of course, we need to prepare for things that are likely to happen, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. But there's a balance. If the future is ruling your present moment, dude, we're sacrificing. As a real estate agent of almost 21 years, I've seen my share of safe rooms. Not like vaults where you go and lock yourself in, but I mean like a basement area or a room that has like a bunch of food and a huge water tank. Because there's so many people who think that martial law is coming next week and tanks are going to roll through the streets and our dollar's not going to be worth anything and our mortgages will be forgiven and stuff. Like, I have a lot of friends who say those exact things to me. Like, don't worry about your house, Paul. Like, pretty soon you won't have to pay your mortgage anymore. I'm like, okay. And so I see people who prepare and they have their backpack ready with all so be prepared, of course. But what I'm saying is when the future, like we were saying, starts to run your present moment.
Yeah.
This can also apply to the past. It's the exact same. Yeah. Many of us dwell on past events that happened and you're not happy about it. And dude, we all have them. And I wish we could go back in time. Regret, guilt, there are meditations and there are tools. Psychologists have tools, and we should work on that. It's a problem, I think. We should work if we're too worried about the past. The present moment is where life exists. All right. I don't know if that was all coherent what I was saying.
So you were mentioning about the past and the future and
worry,
how getting stuck in one or the other.
The Dalai Lama said something about this exact thing, about worry, and it went something like this. If you can do something about the event that you're concerned, that you're worried about, do it. Don't worry about it. Just take action if you can. If you can't do anything about it, don't worry. It's easier said than done, but that's so brilliant.
No, and you're reminding me of something that I was thinking about yesterday in Yin, actually, which is it's this idea of what's the value of any of this awareness. That's what I think we're talking a lot about, like all these definitions, all these scriptures. It builds this higher level of awareness. But sometimes, for me, at points in time, the awareness was paralyzing. Of just like, what can I? But the point that I'm making is that if the next step with that awareness is to take an intentional action, and then it's this cycle of like just the way that it takes different parts of a breath to actually do a full cycle, like where you inhale and exhale.
Yeah.
It's the idea of after the awareness has happened, then take an intentional action with that awareness, and then ideally with that awareness or that action, it can either lead to a deeper connection with myself or with the world around me. But either which, my inner self, not with this egoic part of myself, but my soul. And what I mean by that is this idea of like, even if the intentional action is like, oh, am I lonely because I actually need to literally take an action of being around somebody? Or is it because a part of me, my soul, actually feels neglected? Like it's lacking attention because my ego is so focused on this outer world that I've forgotten that my soul is even there. So then that's where the loneliness is the signal from my soul that's like, hey, Jason, pay attention. And by doing that, I think that it helps me, again, it's a practice to discernment. This is actually something I'm just like starting to explore over these last like couple months, but it's led me to like these paths of going on yoga retreats and connecting with you and doing this podcast. Like all of these things are like, it's not my ego. It's this idea of I'm just listening to the voice that I've shunned a lot within myself. And when that happens, the loneliness goes away.
Wow.
Like it's this freeing energy. I describe it as, I think I mentioned in the first episode where I was dependent on Adderall, but now I realized it was because I was so disconnected from that higher self, my soul, my shadow, these parts of myself that I was fighting against the waves. But now I'm in a state of where, don't get me wrong, it still happens at times, but it's still more, I am now aware that I have this frequency that I can tap into that is a natural innate pharmacy within me that connects me and makes me feel connected to something bigger than myself.
Wow. Oh.
And this is just, I feel like it's all touching upon like all the things that I've learned from you and many other teachers. But it's this idea of we all have access to this. I'm not like breaking ground anywhere other than like for me, myself, in my own experience that I'm taking this action now. But it's to say and share this with everyone else that if you feel like you're stuck in the abyss, I've been there. I get there still at times, and it's that place has so much meaning because it's there that I know.
Ooh, I just got chills, man. Wow.
Yeah, it's there that I really find the tools, the fire to continue to practice these tools. Because then again, if the resistance isn't there and I'm just continuously, there's no resistance, then I just take it for granted. It's just like it's just like air conditioning, where I'm I'm not grateful that this air is here, that all these little things, which is essentially being present.
You just defined why failure occurs and why hardship occurs and why ego occurs. We need this to learn. If everything is perfect, there's no growth, there's no learning, there's no purpose really.
Yes.
You just defined it. When you go into when you found yourself in the dark places, you're saying that that is what prompts you to do the work.
Yeah, I used to. A part of me was like, "Get me the fuck out of here as soon as possible." And don't get me wrong, there are times where I feel that way, just similar to hot yoga, where I'm like, "Get me the fuck out of here." But then I realized, like, it's in these spaces that I can realize that I build this internal trust with myself, and with that trust, I believe like anything is possible.
Dude, yes. I relate 1,000% to that. You asked me something at the retreat, and I was so glad that Asal was filming that. That last clip that I sent you, I'm going to put together some things and probably share some of that. But during that conversation, you asked me, how do I show up when I'm super exhausted and tired, and how do I do all the things that it seems like it's a lot that I'm doing, like for the retreat and when I teach and stuff. You asked something about that, and I said that I've proven to myself that the assistance comes. Like if I'm doing something that's dharmic, that's good for my soul, and then it has to, if it's good for your soul, it has to be good for the world, because the soul is, that's where everyone is connected. The assistance comes, and I know that modern science won't agree, but I have energy. I have what I need. Every time, and like you said just now, that you prove to yourself that you are not alone, that you can find the way out of that place. I've proven that to myself, and I know it's there. It's not negotiable. It'll happen. I can relate, and everyone can access that place, access that help, that assistance, that guidance.
Yeah, and I see it in you, like where during what I was phrasing it as, like the 13th hour, like at the end of every day, where you were still giving, and you would continue to give. And it was this sense of that, and it didn't send it from a sense of like any resentment for having to do it as such, but you still sent, like as you shared, like it was the sense of gratitude almost for being able to even do it.
Yeah.
Which most people in their jobs, no one's at the end of the 40th hour and being like, "Oh, I'm so glad I get to work another, I get to work overtime."
Think about when you help your patients, though. I mean, it's no different.
It's it's different because it's like a part of me. I mean, that's where a whole other conversation of boundaries comes in. But it's this idea of like, at times, I realize it's hard to give out of an empty cup, but like that's what I'm saying. When I'm aligned with something bigger than myself, then the cup is infinite.
Yeah, that's the same concept, just with different words.
Yeah, which is what we're doing here. Like this is what, but I don't always have the relationship with my work, because sometimes I'm working for this bigger machine that's like a different agenda, whole other aspect. It's almost like, oh yeah, we don't need to go. But when like you're giving from yourself and you're giving to a community, and it just becomes this regenerative. Like I actually think that does happen so very fluidly in nature from a science aspect, like where we see that happen in like the circle of life, of like how even regenerative agriculture works in terms of bees and flowers and how it pollinates, and like how this cycle continues so that things can continue to grow and thrive. but it doesn't always happen, I think, for me at times, because sometimes I'm following someone else's agenda.
Of course, if you're an employee being told what to do in certain ways, it's not necessarily dharmic. It's not of your soul's volition, but in a way, you're still aligned in a certain way, and you know what it feels like to have that infinite cup, which is what we're talking about, man. It's so amazing. Wow, dude.
The infinite cup, man. That's like a whole. The infinite cup. That's a whole other. That's episode 6.
Yeah, man.
But any final thoughts, Paul, or any thoughts in terms of like of what you would like to share with other people, or what you feel like you've learned up to this point about the ego, and what you wish maybe you could have known when you were like just starting this journey?
I mean, I wish I would have known that messing up was okay, and you know, not knowing all the perfect sequence of poses is okay when I was first starting to teach yoga. And of course, it would make the journey easier, you know. But like we were saying, like a little bit of nervousness, I think is helpful because you can channel it, and it kind of forces you to prepare a little bit, and it forces you to go over your notes one more time. And yeah, sometimes I was too particular. I had what sometimes is called analysis paralysis. I would try to analyze the situation so much before I do it that I would paralyze myself and not do it. It's better just to do it and mess up a little bit, but that doesn't feel good, or that didn't feel good to me. So I wish I would have been more okay with messing up a little bit, I guess, when I first started. Because my ego doesn't like to mess up. My ego wants to be accurate and proper and precise and all that stuff, which is not necessary. Be yourself.
Yeah. But to add on that, though, I think that I see your attention to detail even in how you ran your yoga retreat. Like, it was so well organized. There weren't any questions. There's a syllabus. But like you mentioned, I think that what I'm hearing from you, or what it sounds like, is like you're able to fine tune it.
Oh, I'm constantly working on stuff. Yeah.
Where it becomes this meaningful tool that like maybe might have been kind of, it's like learning to use fire itself, right? Where at first, when we're first kind of navigating the tool itself, I get burned, but then it becomes this thing that also makes you who you are.
Yes, and we're children in certain ways when it comes to certain tools. We have to learn how to use these tools, and they can be powerful. Like the tool, like your inner pharmacy that you got in there.
Yeah,
that's a really nice tool you got.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I would want to share is that if everything went according to plan from what my ego wanted, I wouldn't be sitting here with you. Like, so many of these, like how so many things of what I thought life would be, it didn't turn out that way. And because of that is what made me seek yoga, what made me seek finding other people that are also trying to make a deeper exploration of what this life is other than what I can see.
Man, and you do such a good job about that. You have a relentless ability to post so many great messages after your yoga experiences, and I think that's such a great trend that you've started. Like the post yoga reflections, man, it's amazing. You're relentless with it, and it's like a practice for you, isn't it? Like every time you do a yoga, any kind of yoga, you usually will evaluate yourself and maybe even interview the teacher and post something about it. That's awesome. And that's creating a community too, because people can watch that and learn from it. I love that so much.
Oh, that means a lot. No, because like similar to what we've been talking about, there are a lot of times where I'm like, I don't want to do this, but I think a part of it is this. It is this practice, everything we're talking about, and I hope whoever, even if it's just me listening to this later, it's the idea of I hope I continue to remember that. I think just continuing to take intentional action is something that I hope helps balance my ego and not necessarily dissolve it, but to strengthen that meaningful balance.
Intentional action that also can help with feelings of sadness, aloneness. Doing something, just taking some kind of action helps.
Yeah,
especially when it's with community. I briefly opened up Instagram this morning and saw Mr. Jason Lau in his doctor coat, but I didn't get to listen to it. Do you want to share what that was?
Oh yeah,
I've never seen you in your doctor's coat before.
So David asked me to. For those that don't know, David works as a school counselor, and he asked me if I wanted to do some little videos with him because he's doing like a sleep awareness week or something like that for his school. So I was just a part of me resisted, but then this is another example of like I wanted to say no, but then I asked myself why I wanted to say no, which was like I was afraid to fail. I was afraid, like, and I told David this. I was like, "Oh, part of me wanted to say no because I wanted it to be perfect because I didn't feel like I was prepared and I didn't have like maybe the headspace to be on top of things as I."
Why did he spring it on you last minute?
No, it was like 2 weeks ago. But a part of me like neglects things, not neglects things, but just like where a part of me is always just trying to get through the work week and trying to find a balance. And I'm always, but anyways, I obviously said yes at the end, but it was more so because of what we're talking about here, which is like it doesn't have to be perfect, and it's all about the intention behind the action for me in that moment, which was not only to connect with a friend the way that we're doing here, but it's also I always feel that if I have the opportunity to use the platform in which I've tried to spend my life trying to work around in terms of building the skill set around becoming a physician and sharing a message of something that I really do believe matters, which is sleep, just the way as much as yoga. I think those are the two very important things. Then I think I'll even if I don't feel comfortable around it, I'll do it. So that's my long-winded answer of saying it was a sleep awareness week, and I wanted to, and David asked me to help him with a video.
Are the videos going to be made public by chance?
I think he's going to share them on Facebook.
Okay.
But like we made, yeah. This is a whole other conversation. But this is like it actually reminded me a lot about like my dharma that I helped discover, that you helped me discover, which is like, and this is what I think will be a whole another episode, which is like, and even what I realized with you, and I shared this with you at the yoga retreat, which is like how to create more spaces available for people to process emotions in community, which I think I know that's what I do use yoga for, but where it becomes this thing of like that's the mainstay of, or it becomes a common awareness that that's a tool that can be used on a regular basis for sustainable emotional hygiene.
Emotional hygiene. Wow, that's a concept.
Yeah. Yes. So until next time.
Yeah. Jason, my man, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. This is always great.
And if you guys have comments or questions, please write them in the chat. We'll talk about them. So thanks for watching.
Namaste, man.
Nice.